Well, I would say, there has been a lot of new developments in this tech space, but it's really been limited to a lot of more of the leading edge technology, the stuff that you might not necessarily find in your car or other electronics that you might have around your house. And so, we're seeing these new restrictions unfolding, but it's not new. There is a lot of precedent here since the Cold War, if you will. There have been export controls on various technologies that the United States and other countries have agreed to implement. And I just see this as another phase of this. There is more restrictions, I guess, on some technologies, and some of it I think is warranted. But for the household consumer, it's not really going to have a big impact on what they consume. You'll still get your phones next year. You'll still get the newest computers or video games, that your children might want to buy. And so it's not really going to have a lasting impact, I would say, in the immediate sense, as far as we can see the developments as they're unfolding right now.
So you kind of pointed there towards how important this is, perhaps in that higher scale of technology. So we're talking military, national defense. Shirley, I want to ask you, is the US's new policies really about protecting its national security and its military, or is this really about money?
Hi, Melina. The national security concept has been significantly broadened in recent years in the United States. Trade, technology, climate, public health are all part of US's national security concept now. So very few people, I think, would agree that economic autarky is a good concept. From the Trump to the Biden administrations, the US government has condemned China's use of industrial policies to develop its cutting-edge technology. But today, the US is launching its very own industrial policies, not only in the crucial technology semiconductor sectors, but also in the crucial NEV industry. So if the US doesn't think that China should use industrial policy as a good economic practice, why would the US use it? And similarly, tariffs are not good for economic growth. Trade today is also a part of US's national security. And so there's little chance that I think the US would actually remove the tariffs on goods from China. So today it's really not about exclusively money or economic growth. It is really about national security.
What do you think, Monique? How much of this is really about protecting and enhancing the US domestic industry, and how much of it is about crippling and limiting China's?
It's about both. The recent CHIPS Act in the US is really designed to improve the American industrial competitiveness, but also to bring back a certain degree of manufacturing capability to the American soil. And on the other hand, the Chinese concern based on national security considerations is a very valid one. And this is because the dual-use nature of semiconductors. And this is also because of China's intensifying use of the civil-military fusion strategy to try to absorb civilian semiconductor technologies for its own military end uses. So the answer is it's really both.
Riley, you kind of pointed to this in your first answer, but I want to drill down on it a little bit more. You mentioned the Cold War, and some people are saying that the restricting of commercial trade in military-relevant technologies is so reminiscent of the Cold War. What do you think? Is this a new Cold War, or is it an extension of what we used to have already been seeing?
I think a lot of people have been trying to make this point about whether there's a new Cold War between the United States and China for quite a while now. I'd say maybe almost 8 years, just right before the Trump administration came in. I wouldn't necessarily put it in those terms. I mean, especially when we're talking about these types of trade restrictions. As I said before, they've been around for almost nearly 30 years now, and they come in various degrees. Some are unilateral, which perhaps the United States alone might implement. Some are multilateral. We do have agreements with many countries at an international level that restrict the import or export of military and weapons of mass destruction level technology. And so, as Monique pointed out, there is this military civil fusion that's going on right now in China, where the Chinese government is trying to utilize their companies, their private companies, to expand their domestic military capabilities. And I think both the Trump and the Biden administration are concerned about that. And what they're trying to do is, of course, in a very, I think, reasonable way, limit the type of exposure or the type of assistance that American companies might be providing to those efforts. And so the restrictions that we've seen up till now, again, are very limited. It is more focused on the high-end semiconductor side, the chips that go into supercomputers or weapons of mass destruction. And so it's not really limited, it's not really expanded to all of technology. But to say that there's a new Cold War, I don't think we're there just yet, because we do still do billions of dollars of trade with China every year on all sorts of goods, including a lot of it technology.
Shirley, Riley described it as a reasonable response to these sorts of concerns. Do you agree? And what's stopping China from just ramping up its own development of these very sophisticated chips and competing with the US?
Well, Riley is very convincing, but I happen to have a slightly different view. I think we are in the second Cold War. Unlike the previous Cold War, which overwhelmingly centered on military competition, this Cold War was centered on technology and global trade. I don't think war is going to be the central nexus for defining the current US-China Cold War. But also, interestingly, we're on the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution. So it is possible that even the world's most advanced chip companies or chip machines monopolized by ASML, for example, can become obsolete one day with the onset of new generations of disruptive technologies. And so if China could happen to master the new generation of technology by luck, then the whole global game strategy would have to be rewritten. So when global order is being fractured, compounded by the major disruptive technologies on the horizon, I think this is a super exciting and highly uncertain period of time.
And we can't really talk about uncertainty surrounding China without talking about Taiwan. So, Monique, to you, Taiwan is such a powerful hub for chip manufacturing. What impact does that have perhaps on China's interaction with Taiwan? Will it make them rethink perhaps their aggressive actions?
That's a very, very important question. Some Chinese scholars have argued that there is an urgent need for China to take over Taiwan militarily in order to control Taiwan's advanced semiconductor firms. The fact of the matter is Chinese firms have also relied on supplies of semiconductor technologies and talents from Taiwan. So if we assume that the Chinese leader remains rational, then they need to think twice about any military attack against Taiwan, which may be, detrimental to the supplies of semiconductors to China, hence to China's own interests. So this certainly has complicated the relations between China and Taiwan. I have to, however, emphasize one thing. National security importance of the semiconductor industry cannot be overstated. And there has been a track record of the Chinese access to American and Taiwanese semiconductor technology to advance its military modernization. A recent example is China's tests of hypersonic missiles, which have relied on supercomputers equipped with semiconductors designed by a Chinese firm, which has access to American and Chinese semiconductor technology. So the real story about semiconductors is really complicated. it is not just about economic competition. There is a very strong national security dimension to the whole story. And this has been there for a long time. It is just that the issue has just been emerged or re-emerged over the past 2 years.
And Shirley, what do you think? Do you think that the US reliance on Taiwan for production has informed the US's foreign policy towards Taiwan?
It's really interesting because just talking about some enduring issues, actually the Taiwan unification issue has been an enduring issue from Beijing's perspective as well. As a matter of fact, ever since 1949. So some senior TSMC executives have been instrumental in speeding up China's semiconductor development process. As a result of their contributions, China's SMIC is today able to produce 7-nanometer chips, essentially on par with the technology capacity that Intel has. And so, but back to the Taiwan issue, you cannot really imagine that China would invade a territory just to seize its manufacturing capacity. The talents would be the first to leave. So without the talents, there would be no TSMC, there would be no semiconductors industry. Remember when Hitler started World War II, he drove the most promising talents from the European zone to the United States. And so it would be naive and I think overly simplistic to think that China would invade Taiwan because of TSMC. But with that said, China has not ruled out the possibility of using any means, including military means, to unify with Taiwan. And so that's been an enduring strategy for China. But that's for reasons other than semiconductors.